Our guest today plays a key role as a protector of our freedoms. His job is to bring to justice those who commit crimes against our citizens. As United States Attorney, our guest today is this area's top federal law enforcement official. Prior to beginning his tenure in Chicago, just over 1 year ago, our guest today served as an assistant United States Attorney in New York and was co-chief of the Organized Crime and Terrorism Unit. In New York, our guest today gained national recognition by prosecuting the United States versus Osama bin Laden case following the bombings of the United States embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. Our guest today also prosecuted the case against those charged with the 1993 bombings of the World Trade Center and won a conviction against John Gambino of the Gambino crime family. Chicago Magazine has called our guest today the, quote, mob-busting, terrorist-chasing prosecutor from New York City, tabbed as the outsider who would clean up the town, unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the City Club of Chicago, United States Attorney of the Northern District of Illinois, Patrick Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald. It's all yours.
Good afternoon, and I thank you very much for having me. What I'd like to do today in some remarks before taking questions is to try to put September 11th, 2001 and September 11th, 2002 in some sort of perspective. I'd like to talk about how we got to September 11th of last year in terms of the development of terrorism in the name of jihad, how we got to where we are today, and where we go from here. And I apologize in advance because today's a very sad and a frightening day. Something spooky feels like it's in the air when you wake up this morning and remember back a year ago. And to the extent that today is extremely sad and extremely frightening, I'll tell you in advance that nothing I say will make you feel less sad, and nothing I say will make you feel less frightened. And I'm not going to even try. What I thought I would do is talk about trying to put September 11th, 2001 in some type of historical perspective. Because sometimes I have the sense that in America, we always pretend that terrorism is something that doesn't strike here. It isn't all that real. And that when September 11th, 2001 came along, people finally thought it hit America hard, and they're surprised, and we want to think it's an aberration, and we'd like to think that after a year, it may be going away. And I think we need to step back and look at some of the cold historical facts and recognize that we have to look on a much broader time frame than a year. I think if we look back, terrorism in the name of jihad, Islamic extremism, came to the United States in the late 1980s, at least 14 years ago, when people were training in the New York area in firearms and paramilitary activities and planning and plotting. And we can forgive ourselves for not knowing what people conspire in private, but we have to recognize that it first started to become public November 1990, a full 11 years before September 11th. And on that day, in a crowded hotel room, something like where we are today in Midtown Manhattan, a rabbi, a pretty extreme rabbi from Israel named Meir Kahane, was assassinated in plain view. And the person who assassinated him was a man by the name of Nosair. And it quickly became a conclusion of the press, of the government, of law enforcement, that Nosair was a lone gunman. And it was dismissed as one of these things that just happened. And as it would turn out, Nosair was not a lone gunman. And as it would turn out, Nosair, while in jail for that offense, would plot the World Trade Center bombing in jail with others. And we would learn years later, after the February 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, that two of the people who carried out the bombing literally drove the van, rented the van, and participated in the bombing and were later convicted, were sitting in that ballroom in downtown Manhattan, caught on videotape, attending the lecture, there to help in the assassination that happened 3 years before. And yet, even on February 26, 1993, we would learn that, if you could say only 6 people were killed. And it's pretty harsh to say only 6 people were killed, other than to realize a bomb weighing more than a ton was in the basement of the World Trade Center, and how all those people got out safely was sort of a miracle. And yet, I still think we were sort of in denial. We saw that it happened, we treated it as an aberration, and we did not fully recognize how much was going on years before, how much the person, Nasser, had been involved in killing Kahani, and the people around him were involved in bombing the World Trade Center. Later that spring, a plot came to light just a few months after the World Trade Center bombing, which most people in this country have forgotten or forgotten most of. The plot was led by the blind sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman and 14 others. They plotted in response to the arrests of the World Trade Center bombers to kill President Mubarak of Egypt when he would visit New York that spring. They plotted to blow up the FBI building, the UN, the Holland Tunnel, and the Lincoln Tunnel, as well as the George Washington Bridge. They filmed the tunnels as they drove through, describing where to place the bombs so that they could kill thousands of New Yorkers. And fortunately, an informant was working with him. An informant set up a garage where they were making the bombs, and he was working for the FBI. He was caught on film. They were all arrested. And they were eventually convicted. Well, people just didn't seem to pay attention to it. That was all public. It was an open trial. It was covered by the press. But the trial was tried in 1995, the same time as the trial of O.J. Simpson. And everyone watched the white Ford Bronco going down the LA Expressway. Everyone followed that trial, and no one seemed to want to register that people try to blow Manhattan to bits. While that trial was going on, an incident happened in Manila, in the Philippines, in December of 1994, where it's since been revealed that the World Trade Center bomber himself was over in the Philippines plotting to bomb 12 airliners of American nationality at the same time. And only by the luck of a fire breaking out in the Manila hotel room where he and his plotters were working did that get prevented. It also came out later that there was a plot to kill the Pope when he visited the Philippines then. But I still think as a nation we thought these things didn't happen, they weren't carried out. The plot to blow up New York is fantastic. The plot to blow up 12 airplanes is sort of a dream, a nightmare, but some sort of thing that really wouldn't happen. And yet it continued. Even after the 2 military installations in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh and Khobar, were bombed in 1995 and 1996, Osama bin Laden issued a public declaration of war against the American military in August of 1996, which was publicized worldwide. Even after that, in February of 1998, Osama bin Laden publicly declared a union with the Egyptian Islamic Jihad organization, declared war on the American civilian population, and told us he was going to kill us, and praised the attacks on the American troops in Somalia, the Riyadh and Khobar bombings in Saudi Arabia, and said, I'm going to attack you. I will kill civilians, and you will see what pain I will cause. Even in May of 1998, after talking to many international TV stations, he gave an interview to an ABC reporter in Afghanistan threatening us, saying you will see something soon. Yet on August 7th, 1998, when 2 embassies were bombed simultaneously, I was shocked to watch TV and watch the broadcasters try to figure out who had done this. His name didn't come up for days. And here he was openly saying to ABC, I'm ready, I'm going to attack you, I'm going to kill you. It went on there further. December 1999, the millennium, we were fortunate enough to foil a plot of Rassam coming across the border from Canada into Seattle with a bomb. There was a plot foiled in Jordan where another person linked to Al-Qaeda had very devious plans to kill people at the millennium. And then we saw the Cole bombing in October 2000, where one of our ships was obviously bombed in Yemen. And despite all those continuing threats, all those threats and those activities, obviously America was shocked by what happened on September 11th, 2001. And while we have a right to be shocked at how diabolical it was, how extensive the death was, and how they went about doing it, we really shouldn't have been shocked that people were trying to kill us for a decade, have been killing us, threatened to do it, and plotted to do it. The reason I bring this up is not for the purpose of frightening you, but to put this in the time frame not of ourselves but of our enemy. And I often think that we think of al-Qaeda as some sort of ragtag gang that we don't give credit for. We think if the gang war subsides for a few months, maybe the problem has gone away. Maybe we can speed up things at the airport. Maybe we shouldn't be so worried, and the crisis has passed. And we have to put ourselves in the time frame of the enemy. And the enemy that strikes us is very patient. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The embassies were bombed, and we caught and convicted the person who did the surveillance of the United States embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. He admitted doing them in late 1993. The bombings were in 1998. He admitted surveilling a number of installations. So this was something that was 5 years in the planning, done like a foreign country, a foreign intelligence organization would do it. It wasn't a decision on a week's notice to go out and bomb an embassy. It was planned for 5 years. The open press reporting about a plot to kill President Mubarak in Ethiopia when he was visiting showed that the group that wanted to kill him learned 2 years in advance he was going to attend a conference in Addis Ababa, and they planned ahead and set up a store on a street where they assumed the motorcade would pass by. They could establish a presence for 2 years. A story I was once told was that back when the Mujahideen, when they were fighting the Russians, a Westerner went in to speak to them, and they looked at the Mujahideen in a cave in Afghanistan and saw on the wall a map, and the Soviet Union was on the map. The Soviet Union was colored green, and there was some Arabic writing on it, and the person asked, "What does that say?" And it said, "Temporarily occupied Muslim land." And they thought, wow, this shows people who are patient and people who dream big. And people sort of laughed, thinking the arrogance to think that you could conquer the Soviet Union. Well, the fact is that they saw more of the weakness of the Soviet Union than we did. And after the fight in Afghanistan, they beat the Russians, and the Soviet Union did collapse. So I think we have to recognize that the enemy we face has a time frame far longer than ours, far more patience than ours, and looks in decades, not in years, not in months, and not in weeks. Part of the success of the last year is that we've seen our military and a number of men and women give up their regular lives to rejoin the military, go overseas, and do a good job of vanquishing many al-Qaeda soldiers on the battlefield. What we have to recognize is that this army of terrorists doesn't fight a conventional war. They're not going to mass a land invasion. They come over and do cowardly suicide attacks. And so I guess the message a year out, looking at how we got to September 11th, 2001, is to show that it's been a long time in the making. It still is in the making. And these people are dedicated to killing us, and they're very patient, and they plot. And we cannot breathe easy 1 year later if things are quieter. And I recognize that doesn't give much comfort to us, but pretending otherwise doesn't do us any good. If we could talk for a moment about how we got from September 11th, 2001 to September 11th, 2002. And a lot of great and heroic people responded. And we had rescue workers, we had the firemen and the policemen who did things that I think the rest of us just can't imagine. To look at a building that's burning and may collapse, and to run into it rather than away from it is something that is remarkable. And what's truly remarkable is how many ordinary people, firemen and policemen with families and jobs and lives they were going about, so willingly did that and gave their lives for others. And we also had the military respond. But I think the one thing that we can't overlook, I think we all recognize that there's been a tremendous trauma to all the people, obviously, who were killed and to their families. But I think we can underestimate the scope of that trauma and how long it will last. And I'll give you a brief example of that. When I had really the privilege to work in the embassy bombing case as part of a team, we went over and we were actually on scene at the site of the embassy bombings within 2 days, within 48 hours of them happening. And the embassies were still smoldering, people are still being pulled from the wreckage. And I say that because we got to see the human cost up close. And back then we couldn't imagine how 224 people could lose their lives and what an impact it could have. And we couldn't just imagine that loss in terms of numbers. And obviously that pales in comparison to what happened last year today. But 3 years into it, having gone through a 6-month trial with agents and prosecutors, we sat down and were getting ready to put witnesses on the stand to explain the impact on them. We had met all the victims before. We had met their families. We knew their stories. We had seen the bombed out embassies while they were still burning and smoldering, and you would have thought we would be pretty ready for it. And I went into a room with a couple of FBI agents and a fellow prosecutor and sat down and started talking to the first victim and said, "Tell me what life's been like. since you lost your husband. And a couple of minutes into it, I just had this wall hit me, and I thought, must be it's been a long trial, maybe it's getting to me, and this is having much more of an impact on me than I thought. And I looked around the room, and I saw the agents and my co-prosecutor basically crying. And at the end of the day, after interviewing about 13 people, we walked out, pale as ghosts. And I ran into my boss, the U.S. Attorney Mary Jo White, and she looked at me and said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, you don't understand. I said, we forget what it goes on to victims and when they tell you their stories. And she sort of gave me that look like, I'll leave this guy alone, but what's wrong with him sort of look like, give him his space. And the next day we had to go in and tell the jury that they were going to hear from victims. And so we told them, you're about to hear from the bombing victims. You've been sitting on a 6-month trial listening to a bombing, and you have no idea what a bombing does to people. And they sort of gave you that look, scrolled up eyes like, what are they talking about? The next day, 15 people walked in. There were no grotesque photographs, there were no morbid depictions of what happened. They only spoke for 15 minutes each. And about 2 witnesses in, you looked around the courtroom, every juror was weeping. The defense lawyers were weeping. The judge had tears running down his cheek. Courtroom security officers, veterans, people around the courtroom, media, everyone just cried. It was one of the saddest things. And what hits you is when you learn the little stories of people who say, I went to school, it's 3 years later, and they asked the teacher how my son's doing, and they say your son sits all day and draws pictures of cars and bombs and buildings. And when you think what happened over there and the impact that it had on children to find out that their relatives are lost, and you think there's an entire generation of young Americans who saw those towers turn into sandcastles with people inside and know how many people died, we're going to be dealing with this for a lot longer than we think. And it's going to hit in waves for many, many years. So the sad news is that the year has passed, but I think the trauma to the victims and the people around them and the rescue workers will continue for a long time. Having said that, and I realize I didn't come to depress anyone, but I think we have to recognize what we're dealing with. We have to look at where we go from here. And one of the things that I think we need to look at is the fact that because the threat continues, the issues will still continue. And the one thing I'd like to do now is publicly thank a lot of the people in the communities who have criticized the government at times. And I'd like to publicly thank the leaders of the Muslim community and the Middle Eastern communities who speak up and advocate their concerns on behalf of the people who live in their neighborhoods or pray at their mosques and have those concerns. Because while we know that, we need to hear it again, and we need to engage that. And it's as important, not only is it important that every American be treated fairly, but that every American be perceived that they're being treated fairly. And I'm hoping that in the next year, when we look forward to September 11th, 2003, that not only will we have no more terrorist attacks, anything like what happened before, but that as a country we can have a better dialogue on many issues. Because there are so many issues out there that are important to our safety, as well as our civil liberties, for which there are no easy answers. And it's too easy to sort of get polarized and have people talk past each other and miss some of the issues. On that note, I'd like to briefly discuss a couple of things that the government has done in terms of national security that I think are misunderstood. We hear a lot about secret detentions, people being hauled off to jail, they have no rights, they have no lawyers, they're never heard from, and we hear analogies to Kafka, we hear analogies to the Japanese being interned in World War II. And I think the one thing that's been done is we've lost ourselves in numbers. Perhaps in the beginning when you saw the running tallies on TV about how many people were detained, people thought lots of terrorists were being arrested. And then now we're getting probably too much blame for arresting people. Most of the people who were arrested were guilty of immigration violations and did not have a right to be here. We had over 319,000 people in this country who've gone through the judicial process and been told they should leave the country and haven't. And we're blurring immigration proceedings and deportation proceedings with criminal cases. Most of the criminal cases, and I'll accept the 2 cases of Jose Padilla, the so-called dirty bomber, and Yusuf Hamdi, who was caught on the battlefield, and putting aside Cuba, and I'm not minimizing those issues. All the other criminal cases have proceeded by the regular rules. We go to court, they get lawyers, there are judges, and judges rule. Sometimes the judges rule with us, sometimes the judges rule against us, and that's the way it should be. In particular, the word material witness has become a bad word at times. And people forget that no one is arrested as a material witness unless we can satisfy a judge that they have testimony that is important and that if we don't arrest them, they won't be here to give it to the grand jury. They also have lawyers, they have bail hearings, and the judges regularly check on that. No one is in there without a lawyer as a material witness, and that is a proceeding that involves judges and counsel. I won't go on too long about the system, but I think what we've got to recognize is we have to have a debate. We have to have a better discussion where people talk to each other and not at each other about these issues, and recognize that there's a difference between being arrested, being detained as a material witness, and being deported. We can't sort of mush it all together and say there's 1,200 people treated in a certain way. Jumping ahead for a moment, I think the thing that we have to look at from here is we have to put things in perspective. The threat continues. The loss and the pain and the sorrow will continue for quite a long time, for a whole generation. But we also have to recognize that we have to pick up and move on in a number of different areas. On the professional front, I think when September 11th happened a year ago, probably everyone in this room wanted to pick up a shovel and go to New York or go to Pennsylvania or go to the Pentagon and start digging and just help get people out. We recognize we can't all do that. And sometimes the best thing we can do is what we usually do, which is to go about our lives and do what we do best and just appreciate our family and friends more, be ready to do what is asked of us when we're called upon, the way so many New Yorkers and people in Washington and Pennsylvania did, and just do a better job. As part of a federal prosecutor's office, I think part of our mission was to continue on doing the other things we do. And we have to recognize that after September 11th, a lot of crime was still going on. The gangster disciples didn't suddenly wake up and decide, you know what, we're a gang breaking the law and we're suddenly become Americans and we're going to go away. They're still out there. And the one poignant moment that always struck me is after we sent the troops into Tora Bora, I always remember we had this film using night vision glasses showing special forces going into a cave, basically saying, we're America, and if you mess with us, we'll hunt you down anywhere in the world and show you that we're going to come get you. And that was a great message to send, to see special forces in a cave in Afghanistan saying, if you strike us, we're coming back. But that same day, there were people on the south side of Chicago afraid to go outside of their apartments, sitting down in bathtubs, making sure that they avoided the risk of a stray bullet going through their window. There are housing projects where people are afraid to walk, and even law enforcement at times was afraid to walk because it was so violent and so dangerous. So when we take back the cave of Tora Bora in Afghanistan, we still have to protect Chicago, New York, and all those other cities. In 1999, we lost 10,000 people to gun violence from illegal handguns. That's 3 to 4 times as many people as we lost on September 11th. We lose that many lives every year, but less dramatically because it's spaced out 2,000 to 3,000 every few months. So I think the message we have to recognize is that drug dealing goes on, gangs go on, corruption goes on. Corporate fraud didn't stop after September 11th. If anything, it's become more visible. People who corrupt our government, people who do things to corrupt the way we go about life just to line their pockets haven't stopped. So part of our mission as prosecutors is to keep up with equal vigor going after those crimes, whether it be violent crime or white-collar crime, so we can maintain the quality of life we have and that those people on September 11th died for. And the last note, and maybe the only hopefully positive thing I'll say, because I hate to be a voice of gloom, is that all those people died living an American way of life. And if we get too depressed and too concerned about security and too afraid and too sad about the whole thing, then the terrorists will have won. And we need to respect how much pain people are suffering. We need to respect that we face a danger, but we've got to go about life. Forgetting what we do at work, we have to enjoy ourselves, our family, our friends. We have to laugh. We have to enjoy what makes this country great, and we can't apologize for that. And I'm sure every single person who lost their life on September 11th would want people to go about being Americans of all religions, and enjoy themselves. Recognize the sobering thought of what happened and what could happen, but we have to pick up and move on from here. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Just a minute. We'll have questions from the floor, and please go over to the microphone over there. This is going to be shown on CAN TV on September 21st. Let me ask the first question. Could you give me a tip as to who the identity of official A is?
No.
I had to ask it. Okay. Please identify yourself.
Kathy Posner. One of the things that scares me so much is how government officials feel the need to give us information in a way to like show off on how much they know, but we're also sharing that same information with our enemies. How come we tell so much so the enemies can put on CNN anywhere in the world or go on the internet and seem to find out everything we know so easily?
That's a great question, and I'll give you two different answers. One is that we have a national schizophrenia about warnings. If something happens and people find out there's any kind of a hint or 3 hints that can be put together to form half a hint about something and they're not told, we say, what did you know and when did you know it and who did you tell? And no one wants to be in a position of making a decision saying, I heard something funny here, I heard something funny there, I don't know quite what to make of it, but I don't want to be criticized of being holding back information. As a federal law enforcement officials, we're concerned that we don't have the credibility with state and local law enforcement that we share everything. I think they think we know more than we do. So we want to make sure, I don't want them to find out from somebody else, so we tend to overshare. On the other hand, once we share the information, people turn around and say, what in the world are you telling us for? You're scaring us. We can't do anything about it, and we're not going to hide under a bed with a helmet on, so why don't you just keep it to yourself? And we haven't, as a nation, decided what to do, and I think there's a fair balance we have to strike. The second part is what we don't decide to share, and I think we have to deal with the fact that there are too many leaks in the world, and some information should stay within the government. We should have fair and open debate, except when it compromises our security, and frankly, there's too much that you read or hear in the media sometimes that comes from government officials that shouldn't be getting that information out. So part of it is we haven't made up our mind as to how much to share openly, and part of it is that we share too much under the table that we shouldn't be sharing at all.
Thank you.
Mr. Fitzgerald, Maureen Murphy. I'm here as chairman of the Republican Party in Cook County. Welcome to Cook County. On all politics being local, it's still a priority of mine about the November 5th election, 54 days from now. And we in Cook County have been a national joke on Leno and Letterman about voter fraud in Cook County and issues such as that. More importantly, there's been systemic failure. 2 court cases since March 19th saw the overturning of elections by Cook County judges because of possible, not shenanigans, but systemic failure. I appeal to your agency, knowing that there will be over 3,000 vacancies for Republican judges of election in the city of Chicago, when the entire other ticket is from the city of Chicago. There will probably be great opportunity for people who want to show just how much they can get done. I appeal to you to find out if there's something that can be done in a proactive way instead of investigating November 6th.
Okay, and I'll take that, letting you know that we already have a person in our office who's an election sort of supervisor and coordinator, and as elections come up, we do have people on call and ready to respond to any allegations that people have that anything improper is happening at the voting booth.
I'm calling upon the county board once again to have a bipartisan election commission in place before November 5th, to call upon 1-800 numbers to have judges of election in those polling places, and to really watch the absenteeism. And maybe we should have a 10% audit November 6th, a random audit of 10% of the polling places, because no one's adding the numbers up post-election unless there's a contest in court. Thank you for your time, and again, welcome to Cook County.
I'm Joyce Saxon. I'm on the board of the City Club. As I left the house at 10:30 this morning, there was a bulletin on WBBM AM News Radio that Osama bin Laden was dead. Do you believe it?
I didn't hear that, and I'll wait to see someone prove it to me. I didn't hear that, and if it came out that he's dead, I haven't been. And if I, just between you and me. I haven't heard anything about that, and if I had, I probably couldn't tell you, but I haven't. Sorry.
Hi.
Try and be more helpful to the next person if I could.
My name is Joel Cohen, and I'm almost speechless following 2 Republican women in Cook County. City Club member, and also I served as 20 years as chairman of the Selective Service System for northeastern Illinois. My question is, should there be a mandatory draft if there is going to be some major war effort that's actually occurring? How, and you are the ones who then carry out the rules and regulations of the Selective Service System. How do you look to actually prioritize your time? You brought up, corporate crime, the disciples on the South Side versus the war on terrorism.
There's two questions there, and I'll answer the second one. We do have lots of priorities, one of which is as powerful as we think the U.S. Attorney's Office is, we obviously don't conduct war, and so I will take a pass on the selective service question. That's not my expertise, and I shouldn't render an opinion on that. As far as priorities in the office, how do we prioritize? I think that what we do, first of all, terrorism is the #1 priority nationwide. That doesn't mean it takes up the most time. It takes up the most important time. We were allocated the equivalent of 9 full-time assistant U.S. attorneys to aid us in the terrorism fight. We're using more time than that. If a terrorism matter comes up, we address it promptly as the first priority. We can handle that with the resources we're given and still have roughly 130 other assistant U.S. attorneys. Then what we've done, we just actually reorganized the office the other day. We have people focused on particular areas. There's a narcotics unit with not quite 24 people in it. Their job is to go after drug gangs, gang violence, and cartels and regional drug trafficking organizations. What you do is you divvy up into groups, and you go after corruption, you go after white-collar crime, you go after drugs and gangs, and you handle the terrorism matters, and you just set people off on what they're going to do. And each person, I think, that's working in those areas, we're hoping, believes fervently in what they're doing. And so you have people who really want to go after drug gangs, just turn them loose, and my job is to get out of the way and let them run with it. We have Ginny Kendall is here. Now I'll embarrass her, but she's an assistant U.S. attorney in my office, and she's been she's been the driving force in our office having to do with child pornography. And so when child pornography cases come in the office, she gets involved. She works with state's attorney's offices. So having her as one of 130 doesn't mean that she can't be very, very dedicated to the child pornography problem, which is a serious issue. Other people are dedicated to other issues. So I think we line people up against a problem and then try and step out of the way.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, Ginny.
Jeff Berkowitz, head of JB Consulting Group. You referred to large numbers of individuals being retained post-September 11th, and you said to distinguish between the criminal detentions and the detentions that were based on deportation or immigration-related matters, violations. And the question is twofold. Some have suggested that that detention of those large numbers of individuals on immigration and deportation issues is the reason why we haven't had another terrorist incident in the last year. And I wondered if you agree with that. And second, some have suggested that those individuals do not have access to a lawyer or even to a judge to say, hey, you got the wrong guy. Is that right? And if so, is it appropriate? Is it constitutional?
Okay. The two questions were whether the large number of people being detained post 9/11 has contributed to the absence of a terrorist attack, and secondly, whether or not those people have an access to a lawyer, and if not, whether that's constitutional. As to the first question, the honest answer is we can't say. If we found someone on an immigration charge and we could prove that they were going to carry out a terrorist attack, I can assure you we would, if we could prove it in open court with evidence we didn't want to protect for some other reason, we would charge them criminally and put them in jail for a very long time and let them know that. We don't know what's in the minds of people who were detained, and so I think it would be, I don't think we can tell you one way or the other what we prevented. It's unknown. As to whether or not the people who are detained on immigration violations have the right to a lawyer, they do. They don't have a right in all cases to appointed counsel if they can't afford one. They do have a right to a lawyer. You asked the question, can they establish that they're not the person wanted? When they're detained for an immigration violation, they're detained because they are here illegally. And so it's not that we have to prove they're guilty of a crime. They're here. They don't have a right to be here. Some of them have also committed a crime. They have a right to an appeal, And they also have the right to...
Can they just stand up and, I mean, can they say, you got the wrong guy? They may be the person, they're after the right person, but they may want to say to a judge, I'm not who you think I am.
And-
They always have that opportunity.
Yes, and they have the right to pretty exhaustive appeals within the system, and then there's a checks and balances system. They have a right to a lawyer. They also have the right to tell people they've been detained. The controversy has been over whether the government will publish a list of all those people detained. They are not prevented from calling up their relatives and saying, I'm being detained in an immigration charge. What is lost in the public discussion is that most of the people who have not been publicly revealed to be detained don't want people to know they're detained, because many come from other countries where if the other countries learned that they were detained by the U.S. government in the wake of 9/11, they may perceive, and they may be right, that when they went home, the other country may think that they're involved in terrorism, and they may not want their countries to be looking at them as terrorists. So many of them, when asked, will say, I don't want my name out. I'd rather deal with my immigration problem and not have my home country know that I'm in jail. And so I think much of the secrecy is self-imposed by those people or their attorneys, and they have a right to call out.
Hello, my name is Judith Turk, and I represent a company called Prepaid Legal. And one of the things I deal with is racial profiling and talking to people about it. This morning, as I was watching TV, one of the commentators said, do we feel safer today? I just came back from California. I was in line with the captain of an airplane who turned out to be the captain of the flight I was on. He and I were stopped, we were searched, and we were asked to take our shoes off. I don't quite think I look like a terrorist, but you never know. And this bothers me. Do I feel safer that I am stopped and the captain of the plane is stopped when some person who may look like a terrorist goes through without inspection? It's a terrible problem, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. How do you address this?
Well, I think, first of all, no one wants to hear that anyone's profiled, but then everyone always makes the argument, but my grandmother from wherever didn't look like a terrorist, so why do they stop her? Well, if we're not going to profile, we have to stop people at random, and if there are tips. I went to the airport one day, and I was laughing. I don't know if he's here, but Chief Judge Aspin was ahead of me on the line, and I saw him going through the line, going to D.C., and they pulled him over, and he's getting all wanded down, and he's taking his shoes off, and I'm shockingly going, there goes the Chief Judge, and I was going through the line for you to catch up and just say hello, except I was pulled over, and I had my shoes off, and I was getting wanded. So they got me and him back to back. And he was clean. As was I. So the reality is there was a streak there where I think I got stopped 3 times in a row. If I was from a different culture, I think they were profiling me, because for a while I couldn't get through the airport without getting pulled over. So one, I think if we're going to be fair, we have to pull people over of all genders, all ages, all backgrounds. Secondly, Al-Qaeda is smarter than we give them credit for. If you have a system where you only pull certain people over, they will send someone else. And I don't want to talk about pending cases, but they will send people who look differently. So we need to do what we have to do. And I think at the end of the day, I don't like having to take my shoes off. You always hope that your socks are in good shape. But look at what happened a year ago, and I'll take my shoes off every flight, and I'll be wanded every flight, if that's what we have to do to feel better.
I was clean too.
Thanks.
My name is Jack Roser. I'm president of the Family Taxpayer Network. I'm a successful businessman and consequently have been able to spend some millions of dollars out of my own pocket in the last 10 years, along with other money that some people devoted to the cause of trying to have a government here in Illinois that stood up for the principles of the Republican Party. I've had a dozen years. I'm an old man. I'm 79 years old just last month. I've been at this a long time.
Repeat the question.
It's been disgusting to me to find the principles of the Republican Party observed in the breach. And I think many of us are very happy that you are here and putting the worst of these in orange suits. They deserve to be there. There's a whole bunch of them that are just unethical. They treat politics as a way to line their own pockets, to express their power, their ego or whatever it is, but it isn't to stand up and be public servants as they're supposed to be in the legislature and the other offices within the state of Illinois. It has been an epidemic of crooks, and I, for one, am very happy that you found one bunch of them that you could say were a RICO conspiracy, racketeering influence conspiracy. There are more than conspiracies than the one you put your finger on. I'm very glad you're here. I'm very glad you're a straight guy, and I'm very glad you're determined, because a lot of us that have spent our time and our money on trying to do something about it are disgusted that we haven't been more successful. I have only one question. Are you going to stay here? There is a question buried here. Are you going to stay here long enough to be able to clean up this immense cesspool?
Okay. He keeps telling me to repeat the question. Okay. I think everyone heard it. I'll answer a different question. How long am I going to stay here? And I'll stay here as long as I can. I enjoy very much the city of Chicago. I enjoy the people I work with. Gary Shapiro, the first assistants here, and Randy Sanborn and Ginny Kendall. The people I work with are terrific. And I'll tell you one thing. This is not an answer to your question, but I'll tell you one thing that embarrasses me about the year I spent here is I spend a good part of lots of days taking credit for other people's work. And so a bunch of assistants and agents go off for months and try a long case, and they win. And I walk out of the lobby, and the security officer says, "Hey, great work." And I'm thinking, okay. I went up and ate apple pie with some of them, and I didn't kill them. I let them do their job, and I've done nothing but let people do their jobs. So I think I get way too much credit because whatever credit I get isn't something I did. But as long as they'll have me, I'll stay.
Well, okay. God love you. You are doing a great thing. Stick with it and take care of yourself.
Mr. Fitzgerald, my name is Chris Roebling, and I want to ask you about the new demands placed on you as a federal prosecutor, to which you briefly referred in your remarks, both working with state and local officials, like Illinois Attorney General, the Chief of the Chicago Police, to detect terrorism before it takes place on our shores, and also whatever new challenges you face dealing with this emerging Department of Homeland Security. I wonder if you could inform us about those two aspects of your responsibilities, which are new since September 11th.
Sure, and the question was to advise how the office deals with state and local authorities on terrorism matters and how we interface with the new and emerging Department of Homeland Security. The first part of the question is easier. We've had a good relationship always with the FBI and with the Chicago Police Department, and what we've done is formed an anti-terrorism task force. The idea of that is not to be operational. The FBI has a joint terrorism task force. If there were an incident or a specific plot, they would spring into action. We would assist and be involved and give legal advice, but the FBI is far better at operational components. What we do is we've expanded that to include state and local law enforcement, city officials such as CTA, other communities, the Illinois State Police, sheriffs, local chiefs of police, and meet roughly every 4 to 6 weeks, brief them on issues. We've got them on a network now with the FBI where they can get threat warnings and bring them in and brief them on the capabilities the federal government has, and they brief us on the capabilities the state government has. And I think what we have to appreciate is sometimes people think that we're the feds, so we'll tolerate the state and local law enforcement and let them work with us. And that's not our attitude. Our attitude is they are far better positioned to deal with a lot of this. We need eyes and ears and feet on the street, and they have a lot more eyes and ears than we do. And I will trust a state and local law enforcement officer to have a sense when something funny is up. And in all the terrorism cases that you look at, often the terrorists have had contact with the state and local officials beforehand. The plot in Manila was broken up by an alert fireman who responded to a fire, thought there was something funny, called a Filipino policeman who thought there was something funny, and eventually got to the American Embassy, and the FBI responded by plane. So I think we have to recognize that we can't sit behind a desk as the federal government and read reports. We need eyes and ears out there. And we also think that the state and locals are better positioned to have relationship with communities because they can talk to people and interact. So it's not something we're trying to accommodate, but something we're trying to recognize they can be better than we are at. As far as the Department of Homeland Security, I think we have to sort of wait till that fully emerges. There's still a lot of issues going on as to how it's going to be structured, who's going to run it, and what the rules of the road are. Right now, we coordinate more directly with the FBI. The FBI deals with Homeland Security, but it is a big part of our job to make sure we work with the state and locals and that they understand that information will flow both ways. Yes.
My name is Catherine Hallahan. An extension of the first part of the last question. You went through this timeline starting with Meyer Kahane from 1990 forward, and it seems that there was this clear escalation of activities. And we're spending an awful lot of time now worrying about shoes and cockpit doors and things that have already happened. And you look at Al-Qaeda and what they've done and think, well, maybe they are been there, done that as far as planes into buildings. Knowing that and knowing the escalation, what should we be looking for? What should we be preparing for?
That's a very good question, and I think you're right. Al-Qaeda is smart enough. You don't want to have experienced an attack and not close off the way the attack occurred and not take reactive measures, but you can't assume that they're going to attack the same way every time. If you look at the progression in the embassy bombing case, they used a truck bomb to attack an embassy overseas. The next one was basically a car bomb at sea, using a skiff to attack the coal. And they went from land to sea, and then they went to air and used airplanes, and that was, they changed it. They are going to change up over time. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people in Washington who were formed to sit in a room and think creatively, think in an evil manner, saying what will come next. But that is the nature of terrorism. The nature of terrorism, and we've had it on tape from these guys, is to strike however they can, wherever they want, and to try and surprise you. So we can't give a false hope that we can precisely anticipate what they'll do. We just have to think ahead and harden targets and work at it. But I can't give you a magic answer of what to look for.
Hi, Joe Reynolds, City Club member. How much, there's been a lot of talk of how much our government or the Bush administration may have known prior to the 9/11 attacks, about the 9/11 attacks. And also, there's been conversation or articles written that when there was a no flying after the 9/11, that a plane of bin Laden's relatives were flown from the United States back to their country. Is there any truth to this, or how much did we know about what was going to happen prior to it happening?
Okay, the question was how much do we know before it happened, and was there a plane that flew bin Laden's relatives out of the country quickly after the attack? The latter half I can't answer. I read the reports of that, and I can't tell you whether that's true or not, or why that happened, or whether it was concerned about safety to their family, but I just can't say yes or no. Obviously, there are whole hearings going on in Congress as to what did people know and when did they know it, and that could be a subject of a month-long congressional session rather than a short answer to a question. All I can tell you is, could we have done a better job in how we organize information? Absolutely. And should we be doing a better job? Absolutely. But I've seen nothing, and I'm aware of nothing that convinces me that we could have, that we knew it was coming. And I think we have to put things in perspective. And I'll give you a quick example. Maybe the best example to look at is the famous Phoenix memo, where an agent out in Phoenix thought there's something fishy going on here with the flight schools, and why don't we do something about it? And people were ready to jump on the FBI and say, if you'd acted quicker, maybe you would have stopped it. And I think if we step back, there is no way in the pre-9/11 world that we ever would have used that to stop the attack. I think the agent was creative and good to think that way and to get that up the process. Most of the training had already been done. I think maybe all of the training had been done. But can you imagine barring people of Middle Eastern descent from flying as passengers on planes because someone in Phoenix thought people from Middle Eastern descent are taking flying lessons? And we want to jump to the conclusion that because they're taking flying lessons, maybe those people might be planning to fly a plane, and therefore maybe it's a passenger might take over a plane, and therefore will ban you from the flight. I can tell you, anyone who recognizes what the world was like before September 11th would say, it never would have happened. There would have been a huge outcry if we tried to do that, and that outcry would have been correct. We wouldn't do it now. We don't ban Middle Eastern people from taking flights. And so sometimes we can sort of get ourselves worked up into thinking we knew something or suspected something, so therefore we could have stopped it. And the reality is that drugs come into this country every day, no matter how much we try and stop it. other contraband comes into this country, and what came into the country were 19 people bent on suicide, and the contraband was in their brain. They were bent on killing themselves and others, and we have to recognize that we can't stop that all the time. And so I've seen nothing in a short answer to convince me that there was some indication that what would happen precisely on 9/11 would happen. Were there indications that something was going to happen? Sure. I think that'll all come out. But I think we shouldn't foster the wrong image that 9/11 was something that was concrete and known and preventable.
Thank you very much.